All right. Wanted to just give a quick report about the most recent festival I've been to, which was Om Festival, which is a New Year's Eve festival here in New Zealand. And the summer season in New Zealand is full of outdoor festivals. It's sunny, it's warm, lots of outdoor music and dancing and stuff. And I tend to go to these things to go and do hand readings or give workshops and presentations. And this was no exception. This is, I think, the fifth or sixth time I've been to Om Festival. Um, and They have a delightful area called the Glade where they have lots of workshops on yoga and meditation, and there's healers and massage therapists. And I was doing hand readings, and I also gave two workshops. And given that the festival environment tends to be full of young people trying to hook up, I thought it'd be quite useful to talk about themes pertinent to that. So we spent 2 days two sessions, two 1 hour workshops, looking at different features of the hand that are to do with boundaries and consent, and to do with the emotional or relating style that people have. And the first thing we did really was to look at the form and of the major waterline as to whether the major waterline is straight or curved, as we look in this diagram now. So as can be seen from this handprint example here, the major waterline is very usually curved between the fingers to the base of the little finger, or more correctly, from the base of the little finger up towards the space between the index finger and the middle finger. So the curved major waterline is the most common and usually found form of the line, and that kind of denotes a kind of rather gradual and easygoing way to make a connection with people. You take your time, you get to know the person. There's a sort of incremental familiarization with that person. And if the line's like this, sort of going up between the fingers, there's kind of openness and authenticity and a desire to connect. So one of the really key things to look at in the major waterline is how close it gets to this exit point, as we like to call it, between the fingers, or if it's or not, if it's actually further down in the palm and doesn't connect through this area here. So you always want to look at the major waterline in terms of how able is that person to actually reach out and connect to you. And the more the line goes between these fingers, and the clearer and the better well formed it is, the easier it is for that person to do that. And of course, we all assume that people are quite honest and people are quite open and people desire an authentic connection with each other, but that's not always the case. So we're looking at the ending of the waterline, where it ends in this part of the hand, and also the shape and the form of the major waterline in terms of the path that it takes across the hand. And as I said, majority of cases, probably something like about 90% of people have a curved major waterline or heart line. And the curved line basically shows uh, this ease of interacting with someone, gradually getting to know somebody, an ease of familiarization with someone else, which kind of brings about a sense of trust and rapport with that person. However, not everybody has a curved major waterline. Sometimes people have really straight ones, and you can see that in this example here. The major waterline, rather than curving up between the fingers, stays really low in the hand and curves across the hand like that. Um, and there's a couple of things that are problematic about this waterline. I mean, the first is that most people don't have a waterline like this. The waterline that's straight like that is very direct, it's very upfront, often very tactile and very physical. The waterline is staying at a very low level in the palm. It's not raising up towards the fingers at all. It's staying quite low in the hand. And so there's often a lack of subtlety about the way that that person will get to know somebody. They're very direct, they're very forward moving, and often very sexual, because when you've got a very straight line like that, it's like the straightness is like a fire quality element. And when you have a fire quality element in the major waterline like that, it kind of adds an intensity to the emotional feeling of the person. So it makes them more intense, more impulsive, more passionate, if you like, but also more sexual. Um, and I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but in the talk I was pointing out is that not everybody has the same emotional way of relating to each other. And If you have a straight major waterline like this, it's probably going to be better for you to have relationships with other people who've got straight major waterlines, because the people with the curved major waterlines are going to find your approach rather direct and possibly slightly offensive, because these people with the curved waterline are kind of wanting to let their boundaries down quite carefully and quite slowly. Whereas what you've got with a straight major waterline is somebody who is will push forward and bound forward with their enthusiasm and excitement, and that may actually push over the kind of protections and boundaries that that person has. So if you've got a curved major waterline, one of the things you might want to watch out for is someone who's got a straight major waterline, because if it's got a straight major waterline, they may be slightly more direct than you may like or that you may wish for. The most famous example I have discussed recently in another video on YouTube is Russell Brand, who has a straight major waterline, a very classic example of that, given his sex addiction. And he talks very openly about it and very openly about how he interacts with people. And he's a chancer, and he knows that, and he takes the opportunity, and he's very happy if he meets other people who've got the same pattern. And if it's consensual and both people are into it, that's not a problem. The problem comes when there's this disjuncture, and the assumption is, of course, that all people are the same. And actually, as we can see from these lines, people are not. The second thing to consider about this line, from the point of view of the curved waterline, is there is no real connection up here to the opening between the two fingers. And so there's generally a lack of nuance, a lack of finesse, um, often quite poor verbal communication skills. Um, the section of the line up between the fingers is really a good indicator of someone's ability to articulate and communicate how they feel to another person. With these people, their feelings are quite buried and quite physical, so they're staying within the body. So they enact them, and that's how they come across, and how they get them out is to by be physically enacting with them. They may do it through sport, they may do it through dance, they may do it through movement. That's another way for them to express emotionally. But essentially, what you've got here is a kind of inhibited emotional response, in the sense that it's not communicated. It's not. There's no verbal utterances and stuff. So these people may have a lot of sex, but be very bad at saying "I love you" and having good intimate conversations, because they're missing. Essentially, they're missing this section of the line up there. So their ability to kind of communicate in an open way, authentically about the relationships, is often underdeveloped or even completely missing, depending on how this line formation. Actually, in this particular case, there is a little bit of an overlapping line up here, a little bit of a reduplication. So he's quite sociable. He's got a sort of public persona that copes with that. But actually, his true feelings are very deeply buried and often internally held. So that can be quite a sort of difficult experience for someone who's not so not used to someone who's so full on and intense with their emotions, particularly in this particular case where, as you can see, he also has an incredibly strong erotica line. So this is somebody with a very strong, passionate sexual energy and sexual drive. He also has a major fire line, which is this line down here. So this is a man with a huge amount of physical energy and vitality, and a very, very long and strong thumb. We'll come to that in a moment. So this is a man with a lot of drive, a lot of energy, and a lot of sexual drive, and a lot of sexual energy as well. Um, and he was very popular with the young women when I knew him. What is it, about 40 years ago? So yes, so the major waterline is kind of really important indicator of how things work between two people. And then the second thing to consider is the ending of the major waterline, as in terms of how open someone is, or how difficult they find it to express and articulate themselves with their emotions. And we'll look at this now. So many years ago, I did a survey of the different endings of the major waterline. And as you can see from here, we actually discovered there are a lot of variations in the lines. And some of these lines are very, very common, and some of them are very rare. So the one that I just was talking about with the ending between the fingers, is actually really rare. It only occurs in about 6 or 7% of people's hands. So that's actually very rare. The most common ending is what we call the reduplicated ending here, which is where you can see there's a little bit of an overlap on the line there. I'll just see if I can find a handprint example of that, just to show you exactly what I mean. Um, But there you go. So there's a balance ending to the major waterline. So there's the major waterline coming up between the fingers like that. And as I said, people with this kind of waterline are open. They desire authenticity in their relationships. They don't hide anything. They say what they feel and they feel what they say, and they're quite open and they seek that kind of authentic and honest communication with other people. So a lot of people consider these people to be quite emotionally quite brave because they're quite they have that kind of emotionality and they openness to in their interaction with other people. But much more commonly is you get this ending of the line where, as you can see here, the line doesn't quite reach up between the fingers and it's got this little overlap. So the little overlapping line here is what we call the reduplicated ending, and that is extremely common. Occurs in about 45 to 47% of people's hands, at least in the UK population, and kind of shows a kind of an emotional reserve. Stiff upper lip. We don't show your emotions. Don't give anything away. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve. It's kind of a tactical position that people take to not show their hand or not to expose themselves emotionally, so that they basically they can see uh, present an image of themselves which is not necessarily the same as how they feel internally. So that's what we get with this particular pattern. What is coming up between the fingers is that which is presented, that which is seen by others. So if you imagine other people meeting this person, they're coming down the waterline like that, and this is their emotions coming from the inside towards the outside. What we see meeting this person is this little bit of an image up here, this little sort of professional face, if you like. So these are people who have telephone voices, or these are people who have, um, you know, hide don't can deal with people even if they don't like them, don't show how they really feel. It's very good in a professional situation if you're dealing with customers, or if you're in a profession like a lawyer or a nurse or something like that, where you might have to deal with someone who's thoroughly unpleasant, but it's your professional duty to treat them professionally. Um, so there can be definitely an asset to do that. So one of the things we look at is how well developed that line is, like how long it is, and also how big the gap is between the two lines, between the upper line and the lower line. If it's a little gap like that, it's not such a big deal. It's more of a sort of face or a public face or front, and that you can once you get to know somebody, they'll let you in and they'll tell you how they really feel on the inside. So the problem comes when, of course, the line is very widely separated. Before I find an example of that, I just want to point out again another really strong example of an erotica line coming in this hand here. So despite this public face of this woman, that she's sort of, maybe quite prim and proper, she's got a strong erotic fantasy life, that's for sure. All right, so let's see if we can find another example of this where that line's a bit more extended. This is an example of the reserved one. This is the quiet, silent chap who doesn't say anything. You never know what they're feeling. They don't know what they're feeling half the time either. But you can sort of never get anything out from them. You never quite know what's going on with them. They're always very kind of emotionally reserved. There's another reduplicated ending there. This is the one I wanted to look at. Yeah. So in this example, you can see that the major waterline is still curving slightly upwards, but the secondary line is much, much, much longer. And this is what we call a persona line. And you can see there's a big gap between the two lines. Here, there's a big gap here. And also you can see that there's this persona line is actually really long. So this is not just a sort of a momentary affectation or a momentary mode of expression. When someone's got a developed line like this, it's like they become the persona that they are presenting. So it's more commonly seen in the hands of actors. Whether or not that person is a film star or a professional actor on stage, these people are by nature actors. They are presenting an image to themselves, which they kind of created a whole backstory to. And so the problem with this configuration is, particularly if you've got the waterline going straight through into the base between the fingers with no reduplication, is there's often a lack of honesty and clarity. And these people, they're often not honest to themselves, or they're confused about how they feel, or what they present and what they look like, and how they come across to other people isn't really what's going on inside them. So that's the thing to look at here. What's going on up here, what's presented is different from what's going on inside them. And so Again, this was kind of like a warning I was giving to um, the audience in this talk. You know, there were about 60, 70 people in the workshop, mostly women. And I was just basically saying, you know, there are some people aren't always as honest and straightforward as you might think that they are, and you might think you might be trusting, and you might think that people are good like that, but not everybody is. And here's some examples of that being the case. That you know, this what you see is not always what you get. So that was kind of like the talk I did on the first day was to talk about how we connect or how we don't connect, how honest people are or how open people are. Often people with that reduplicated ending have got trust issues, and it may be to do with some kind of trauma or childhood difficult experiences. And they may or may not be aware of that. Oftentimes, the most pathological behaviors are actually instigated by um, a lack of awareness of the kind of antecedent conditions of those particular pathologies. So you never know from looking at the hand whether someone, how much self-awareness someone has. But what you do know when you see that hand, those formations of the line like that, is it's going to be a much more tricky relationship because that person may not be entirely honest with themselves, even if they're not deliberately manipulating or deliberately deceiving you. It may be that they are kind of deceiving themselves in some kind of way. So look at the line. Is it straight? Is it curved? Look at the ending. Does it reach all the way to the end, or does it hold back in some kind of way? So that was a talk I gave on the first day of the festival, um, and then I did a load of hand readings as well. Of course, when you do a workshop like that, of course, everybody wants to come and have their hands read. So yeah, I call the lines on your hand. The lines on your hand show the way to your heart, which I thought was quite a nice way of putting it. And I had some really good examples of in the hand readings that day. I'm just going to talk about a few of them. Um, One of the most striking examples I got was somebody who had a doubled major earth line. So the double major earth line is the one that runs around the ball of thumb like this, and she had two of them, which is a really unusual thing to find. What was interesting about her was she was actually adopted, but and which itself isn't that unusual, but she was still kept in contact with her birth family as well as her foster family. So she had the two senses of herself being related to both her biological family and the people who looked after and raised her, which I thought was a particularly striking example. And in fact, someone else who I saw that day, which is a very interesting ending of the line. They had a short low set of. I saw two men with short low air fingers on that first day. The lotus air finger is something that's quite commonly seen in the hands of women, probably about 50 or 60%, something like that. It's quite high. But the not very commonly seen in men, but in both of these cases, they both had really problematic relationships with their mother. One guy, his mother had mental health issues when he was young, and basically neglected him as a result of that. It's much more common to see the absence of the neglect coming from the father. Because fathers are much more often absent from their family. It's very rare to see it in the hands of men because it's very rare that the mothers are absent. But and this is a good example which I learned from about how that actually can manifest sometimes is if the mother has mental health issues or she's an alcoholic, she's mentally absenting herself from the parenting role that she's bound to, then the child will suffer and the boy will suffer as much as that as anybody else. And that will impact his relationships with women as an adult male as well, in the same way that the short low air finger in the hands of women affects her relationships with adult men in her adult life. That wasn't surprising. That was a surprising find. But what wasn't quite surprising was a Korean young man who came who also had a short low air finger. And when I've seen short low air fingers in the hands of men, they're much more commonly found in the hands of people from China, Hong Kong, India, and now apparently Korea as well. So there's something about the way that the women or mothers are in relationship to the boys that's indicative of this. I think I'm not quite sure why that should be so because I've not been to those countries, but there's some kind of strictness or domineering quality or overbearing quality that they bring to that relationship, which is really problematic for the boys. Anyway, this was so that wasn't an entirely expected thing to find, but a really good one to learn from as well. Lots of radio loops. I think there was a lot of radio loop conversations. One young man had two radio loops. I spent half an hour just talking about one fingerprint pattern on this boy's hand, this young man's hand. It was a really extraordinary conversation for him. And one person, I'm going to try and find a handprint of this example. It's not the one I actually took, but let me just see if I can find it. So this is a fantastic session reading I had with this one woman. Um, she had six digital whirls, but she also had a whirl on the palm between her ring finger and her fire finger. Now, this is not her hand, but this is just a good example of it. And you can see the pattern right there, this whirl pattern here. Um, and so immediately I knew I was in the presence of somebody really quite unique and really quite different and really quite extraordinary. Um, and interdigital worlds are really very rare to find. I don't even know what the percentages are, but it's kind of definitely much less than 1%. And she was a creative. She was a clothes designer and quite a well-known international clothes designer. Um, and that's what I always tend to find when I've got people with wells in their palm. They're somehow brilliant in some kind of way. They kind of have some original quality or original kind of characteristic that makes them quite unique and quite different. And therefore, you've got to expect something there. The world always shows originality, it shows mental alacrity, it shows inventiveness and creativity. And I often associate this particular one more with the air finger to do with communication and languages and speech and so on and so forth. I know a very good singer-songwriter with one. There's a woman I know who can speak like five languages, including German, Croatian, Chinese, Japanese. Uh, I can't remember, and English. So yeah, she's to a very high level, professional level. So people with this tend to be quite unusual and extraordinary. So I don't know if it's a design thing. I mean, obviously, this pattern could equally spread to both the air finger, which all those qualities I just talked about are air finger qualities, or it could spread to the ring finger or the fire finger, which is to do with passion and design and color and presentation. So I'm not going to legislate where that will impact to, but when you see a whirl in the palm like that, you're not going to know what it's about. So you might as well just ask the question and say, well, what do you do that's so original and different and creative and brilliant? Because they'll be doing something original, creative, and different and brilliant for sure. So that's something to really watch out for. I think I might have another picture of one. Here you go. Here's one in the flesh. In fact, this is an example of somebody with two interdigital worlds. So they're quite distinctive when you see them. They're quite a fascinating thing to see. And you don't see them very often. There you go. There's that's actually the same ones, but actually on the whole hand, so you can see how distinctive they are when you see them. So look out for those because they're really, really rare. So that was a couple of really interesting handprints that I did on the first day. And then on the second day workshop, I was talking about boundaries and consent, really. And when we're looking at boundaries and consent in the hand, what we're particularly concerned with is the thumb and the little finger. So the thumb is to do with the measure of our power and our ability to assert ourselves in the world, and the little finger is to do with the power of communication. So if we can find some examples of those handprints, I will show you what I mean by that, and then you'll see the difference of what I'm talking. So this is the handprint we looked at before with the highly sexed footballer he was actually. And you can see there he's got an incredibly powerfully strong thumb. It's actually both long and very wide angle. The angle here is a kind of one of the key indicators of how sort of domineering and overbearing somebody is. So the more powerful the thumb in terms of its angle, the more the person will kind of impose themselves upon the world and make an impression upon other people or will dominate the room in some kind of way. And in contrast, of course, you get a thumb that's kind of much more recessive. I think it's the other way. Let's go the other way. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. So in contrast is when you get a thumb that is actually much more held into the side of the thumb. And this is so someone who's much more timid, much more fearful, has much less impact on the world. And this is completely natural formation of the thumb as it's being taken there. So you can see that it's really inhibited and really held in that part of the hand there. So it's really kind of shows someone who has very little sense of control over their life and very little influence and sway over the environment around them. And the bigger the thumb or the wide angle of the thumb, the more that person has that kind of powerful effect upon the world around them. So that's a really good thing to contrast is to look at the relatively strength of the thumb. And then the other thing that's really important to look at, if we can find it, no, I'm going the wrong way clearly. Let's just find the thumb, is the flexibility of the thumb. Because the more flexible the thumb, here you go, the more flexible the thumb, the more the person kind of will accommodate to the needs to other people, the demands of other people. So somebody with a really loose, wibbly wobbly lower phalange and a bendy top phalange of the thumb can be much more susceptible to kind of um, pressure from other people and have much greater difficulty saying no to people. The bendier the thumb is, the more you're compliant you are to other people, the more you'll accede to their demands or their wishes. And so with the thumb bent, like particularly like this one on the right, where you can see it's kind of bent almost at a kind of 90-degree angle. It shows someone who's very susceptible to being to peer group pressure or social pressure from other people. So that's something to be careful of and to watch out for is if you've got a really bendy thumb, is how susceptible you are to being pressured into doing things. And that pressure is what will make you overstep your boundaries. So if you have a weak thumb or a wobbly thumb, and you've got a thumb that's kind of held in like that, you'll find it harder to stand your ground and to say no to things, and therefore be much more susceptible to the kind of pressures of people with those straight major water lines and powerful passion lines and erotica lines in their hands. And then the other thing that we talked about is the air finger and how the air finger is impacted in this situation too. So let me just find out some images of that. And the most important indicator of a particular problem with communication is to do with the length of the little finger. So you can see here, the little finger is not up to this crease at the base at the top of the fire finger. It's much shorter than that. So the fact that there's this gap here and this length of the air finger. So the air finger is to do with communication and speech and articulation. And when someone's got a short little air finger like that, they find it much harder to speak their mind, much harder to say what they want, so much harder to articulate their needs, and when particularly find it difficult to put things into words when they're put on the spot. So these again is an indication of a vulnerability to a kind of pressure. If you were a door-to-door salesman and you saw someone like this, you know that you basically are able to sell them whatever it is you're trying to sell to them. So short looks at their finger makes it difficult for that person to communicate themselves. And that means both saying yes and both saying no. And they can easily be overwhelmed by, for example, argument or persuasion and stuff like that. So long air fingers are very persuasive and short air fingers, not so much. And it's really common to see this finger being short um, in, uh, in the hands of women. And sometimes it's really, really very extreme. Um, as this example here shows. So this is somebody where you've got an air finger which should be up to here, and in fact is here. And you can see that the finger's sort of sunk down into the base of the palm. Um, I'm not going to go into the significance of that in this conversation, but um, the that's the effect. You can the slant there of that sloping of their fingers really, really low, like that. So this is a problem for this person, and the problem for this person is a deep-seated inability to articulate their needs, and that's often rooted in a very deep-seated sense of lack of self-worth. But this is really problematic when it comes to communication, particularly communication in relationship situations and in sexual encounters for this woman in terms of relationship to men. So for many women, a lot of their problems in their relationship with men come from this short and low set air finger, and despite them thinking that they're capable, rational women are and able to say what they want, are in that instance have got something has happened to them that's causing an impediment in their ability to articulate their needs, and that's really what is shown by that short low set air finger. So. So basically the talk was about that, what's our yeses and what's our nos? How do we articulate those? How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we maintain our boundaries? So if you're looking at that question when you're reading someone's hand, then look at the air finger and look at the thumb, and that will give you some important clues. Yep, so that was the talk of the second day, sex, consent, and boundaries. And again, some really interesting handprints turn up that day. Another person with six whirls, Morlow said air fingers and hyperflexive thumbs. That was particularly, there was one young woman with that, which was obviously the conversation itself was particularly relevant to the workshop. Um, so yeah, so probably I read 26 pairs of hands in 2 days, which is a lot of hand readings to do. Um, and some of those are quite short, 15-minute readings, some of the half-hour readings, but if you're selecting what to say about the hand and you're kind of applying yourself in that kind of way, you will come up with things that are really useful and really pertinent for that person that they can take away with them. And it's something that they can therefore find very, very useful and very, very insightful. So that was my theme for the festival, was to talk about emotions, how we make connections, how we socialize, how we reach out, how we say yes, how we say no, what are our boundaries, and what's our consent. So I'm going to be going to another festival soon, and I'll do a little report after that one. But that's on festival, New Year's 2024 going into 2025. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you really want to know more about hand reading, what all this stuff means, then you need to come to see me at Patreon, patreon.com/hand reading. And I'm also on Facebook and on Instagram too. But the real stuff is done in classes and in Patreon. So if you really want to learn about hand reading and how to read your hands, go and check out my Patreon website. The details are below. All right, see you soon.